Thank you for purchasing this training entitled The Emotional Effects of Video Games on Boys. My name is Dale Sadler, and I am a licensed professional counselor practicing in White House, Tennessee. Video games have always been a big part of my life. I played them as a young boy, I played them in high school and in college, and I even play them now as a grown man with 2 children. So through my personal experience and the research that I've done, I hope that this training will give you a lot of useful information to use either in your counseling business or in your other job as a parent. First off, let's talk about the history of video games and where they've come from. A lot of things have changed over the years, and this hopefully will give you a good perspective on just how far we've come. The very first video game, if you could call it that, was a cathode ray tube amusement device. This was in 1947, and with a pre-programmed plot put within the cathode tube, people could turn a little knob and it would move the lights on the screen until it hit a determined target. And it was actually something that they put on top of the screen. And then people, like I said, would move the little light around and actually hit the target. In 1971, the first coin-operated video game was installed at Stanford University in their Student Center, I believe. 1972, Magnavox Odyssey was released, and this was the first console game system. Worked a little differently than the Atari video game system, but it was a console nonetheless. You may remember in television, which was somewhat ahead of its time, Atari had a joystick and 1 button. In television, which was the alternative to Atari, it had a keypad with these little plastic cards that came with the game, and you slid that in over the keypad, and you could tell what the buttons did based on the little plastic card. And of course, it had a directional pad with it as well. 1982, ColecoVision was released. From the late 80s to the late 90s, video game technology grew exponentially, and you're going to see how in just a moment as we run through somewhat of a timeline of video game development. We are currently in the 7th generation of video game technology, and with some of my friends that I talk to, looks like we might be getting into the 8th generation very soon. Here's video game development over time in regards to the different games, and you'll recognize some of these. Pong was a very early game. It was the only game that you could play on the system. Of course, it was a table tennis type game with 2 small bars on either side of the screen, going up and down and knocking a little ball back and forth. The next was Pac-Man. A little more involved with how you were to interact with the game, with movements and so forth. And of course, this was a console system that had a very strong source of games. I have an Atari in my attic right now. Don't have anything to hook it up with, though. The technology is pretty old now. But Pac-Man was a big game, and then Super Mario Brothers came out with the Nintendo Entertainment System, and I believe Mario Brothers was actually on the Atari, and then the NES came out and with Super Mario Brothers, which had a whole new dimension of video games as far as the colors, the way things looked, and the movement and so forth on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Then Wolfenstein was a huge jump in the video game genre. With Super Mario Brothers, you moved from the left of the screen to the right and progressed through levels. In Wolfenstein, this was the very first-person shooter game, an FPS game, and you saw the gun that your character was holding. That was all you saw of your character, and you, I believe on Wolfenstein, could switch different guns and so forth. I know you could on the later versions, the later type games, but Doom, which is another very popular game, first-person shooter game, is like this. But Wolfenstein was the first, and you had to play it actually on a PC. There were walls around you. You didn't have to move left or right, but you actually moved through a 3-dimensional world. Then Grand Theft Auto, another huge jump, very indicative of the technology and the programming that has changed the video game industry. With Grand Theft Auto and games like it, you're actually in a whole world. You go different places, play different levels, and everything looks very, very real. Derby Owners Club is an interesting part of video gaming. It is not necessarily one that you would play at home. I don't believe it's at home at all. But for the Derby Owners Club, you would see it at bowling alleys, possibly gambling casinos. The one that I saw was in a bowling alley, and there's this huge screen, several consoles in front of the screen. It was a rather expensive game, $1.50 or $2, and what you got, you didn't just play the game, but you actually got a card that you used, and on the card was a horse. It's a horse racing game, just like if you were to go to Louisville or something and bet on the horse races. Well, you actually were buying a horse the very first time you played this, and you would put the horse into the game, and you would train the horse and take care of it, do various other things with it, such as buy another horse and breed it with the first one. And there you go. You've got a stable full of horses. As you buy more cards, train them, breed them with other horses. I don't know what you call it, but your pack of cards, I suppose, I know you can call it that, your stable grows and grows and grows, and you actually develop within the game, of course, and be very competitive with that. EverQuest is an interesting arena of video games, probably the most addictive type and the most time-consuming. Games like EverQuest, you actually live inside of them. It's not just a character that you're manipulating, but for a lot of people, EverQuest characters actually represent them. World of Warcraft is another very popular game, much like EverQuest. It's so time-consuming because you have to be any good at it at all. You have to spend a lot of time on it. It's not something like Pac-Man that you're just going to pick up, play for a